Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and it is October, which means it's time for all the spooks and the ghouls and the goblins and the Bill Cosbys and such. I don't know why. Got a new chair to start this series. It's not just for this series. It's permanent. I got a brand new computer chair, and it's real nice. I like so much more comfortable, which means I care even less about the structure and the sophistication, which there was never any to begin with. But here's the thing. There's no posture in this chair and sitting in this chair. I am just splayed all over the place. Like, honestly, like I look like that guy from the World of Warcraft episode of South Park. I'm all over it. And so this show before was the podcast equivalent of just like a 1983 Pinto held together with duct tape. And now I don't know what's worse than that. But we're going to find out, because I could not be more comfortable. Actually, I probably could, but this is way more comfortable than I was in the other chair. You get it. I think might actually be like, I think I've done this show for so long. I think this is like the third chair that I have used. So that's crazy. Anyway, whatever, dude. You don't care. You're here for some aliens, and we are looking at 4 stories of some alien encounters, some alleged alien encounters. Ooh, spooky. We are looking at the Cash Landrum incident, the encounter in Voronezh, I think it was Russia. Yeah, it was Russia. And the Vargina incident. I'm not making that name up. I'm pretty sure it is pronounced Varginha. Varginha. It's probably like Varginha. It's Brazil. And our first story after the music will be the Kelly Hopkinsville encounter. Story time. On August 21st, 1959, a dozen people, 5 adults and 7 children, barged into the Hopkinsville, Kentucky police station, frantically claiming that aliens were attacking their farmhouse in the nearby town of Kelly. These 12 people had basically spent the last 4 hours in a gun battle with these aliens before they were finally able to retreat to the police station. Elmer Sutton and Billy Ray Taylor, already 2 very credible sounding names, described these aliens as, quote, short, dark figures who repeatedly popped up at the doorway. And the police were really more concerned over the gunfight that these people had just admitted to, more so than the aliens that were invading this small town in Kentucky. And so a group of authorities that included city police, state troopers, sheriffs, and military police officers from nearby Fort Campbell drove down to the farmhouse. But by the time they arrived, nothing really seemed out of the ordinary. Investigators did find bullet holes in a few windows and screen doors, but that was about it. The next day, neighbors told police that everyone in the farmhouse, which basically consisted of 5 different families, had packed up and abandoned the house after the aliens had actually returned after all the investigators left in the middle of the night. All of these claims made national headlines, which later described the aliens as being 2 to 4 feet tall with pointed ears, claws, and yellow glowing eyes. The town of Kelly, Kentucky, where the incident took place, is known as the origin of the phrase little green men, which wasn't even in the original description, but whatever. But the town, as far as I know, still holds the Little Green Men Days in August. However, ufologists, other skeptics, and reasonable people don't believe it was an alien encounter at all, but rather was just an attack by a group of great horned owls. And if you read the description, 2 to 4 feet tall, pointed ears, claws, and yellow glowing eyes is exactly what a great horned owl looks like. Some ufologists, however, believe it was actually gremlins, which aren't aliens, but are like, the movie Gremlins, the little Furby looking creatures that weren't even really well known in the mainstream until the 1984 movie Gremlins, but whatever. It's not important because it was just these itinerant families, probably circus travelers, probably high, maybe. That was 1955. And they just didn't know what owls looked like. So our next story here, on December 29th, 1980, Betty Cash was driving home to Dayton, Texas with her friend Vicki Landrum and Vicki's grandson, Colby, after a fun night out at the local Applebee's or whatever was going on in Texas at the time. I'm trying to just paint a picture here, honestly. As they drove down a rural back road in the dense East Texas woods, they noticed a bright light shining above the tree line. At first, they thought it was just a plane going to land at the relatively nearby Houston airport, but after driving a few more minutes along the winding road, they noticed that the light was still there in that same spot. This time, however, the light was much brighter and even closer, probably because they were driving towards it. Even more, it was coming from a diamond-shaped object, which had a massive flame coming from the back that produced such strong heat that Betty and Vicky actually claimed to feel it from inside the car. And fearing that as they got closer, the car would just burst into flames, Vicky told Betty to stop the car. Colby, he's like, "Oh my God, what's going on?" And then Vicky was just like, "Oh, honey, that's Jesus." And she was pretty convinced that it really was Jesus because obviously Jesus would return as a diamond or in a diamond-shaped ship, right? I mean, I don't know. Probably. But she was like, "He's not going to hurt us. It's fine." So despite the initial fear that they would burn up because of the heat coming from this light and this craft, Betty and Vicky got out of the car while Colby stayed in the back seat and just started to freak out. The object, which looked eerily similar to the Dayton, Texas water tower, had small blue lights around the center of its dull silver frame. Cone-shaped flames were shooting from the bottom every few minutes as it hovered above them. And each time the flames would appear, the object would ascend and then float down the road, kind of like a hot air balloon. Interesting. Betty and Vicky decided to get back into the car, but realized that the metal on the door handles of their car were actually now way too hot to touch. And so they both used their jackets to protect their hands and get back inside. Vicky then pressed her hand to the vinyl dashboard, which actually left an imprint that remained there for several weeks. Meanwhile, this random, weird, mysterious object continued to move higher up into the sky, and then suddenly 23 Chinook helicopters surrounded the object and escorted it off into the distance. Betty drove after it, but eventually, they all got away. Once everything was over, Betty dropped Vicky and Colby Landrum off and then went home. That night, all three people had vomited and had severe diarrhea. Their eyes were burning, their muscles were weak, and it only got worse from there. Betty actually developed blisters on her skin. She started losing her hair and her ability to walk and actually ended up spending nearly a month in the hospital. The Landrums also lost clumps of hair and felt very weak, but they weren't as bad as Betty. A radiologist ended up examining each person's medical records and claimed that each one showed signs of ionizing radiation, which, that's normal. Other doctors argued, though, that the quick onset of symptoms could have only been caused by exposure of a high enough dose that would have ultimately killed them in a few days, not just made them really sick. While all this is going on, Vicky called several government agencies to report the incident and was eventually directed to John Schuessler, a NASA aerospace engineer. Schuessler's investigation immediately focused on the 23 Chinook helicopters that appeared on the night of the incident, with Schuessler and MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network who goes out and investigates these sorts of claims, coming to believe that at least one branch of the military was aware of the incident. It's great deductive reasoning there. However, no record actually existed of any helicopter in the area at that night, despite a local police officer and his wife reporting that they saw 12 helicopters in the area around the same time. The Department of the Army Inspector General opened a formal investigation in 1982, but didn't find any evidence that the helicopters that were reported on the night of the incident even belonged to the United States. Who did they belong to? Vicky, Betty, and the police officer who reported the helicopters were all ultimately found to be credible witnesses. Although a Geiger counter was used on Betty's car, it did not record any radiation. However, researchers argued that ionizing radiation doesn't actually leave behind radioactivity in the objects that it touches. So everything's a big mystery. Betty and Vicky went on to appear on various television shows in which they consistently recounted the events in the very same way. Like, their story did not change. They also filed a $20 million civil suit with the U.S. government for their injuries. A U.S. district court judge dismissed the case, citing no evidence that the helicopters belonged to the U.S. military, and that military officials had testified under oath that they never had a diamond-shaped aircraft in their possession. So a lot of mystery still around that specific event. But I don't know. It's just odd that, like, those are just like Vicky, Betty, and then this one other officer. They're the only ones who saw it, even though East Texas, not exactly like the most populated place, but like they were close enough to Houston that people should have seen it. More people should have seen it. I don't know. It's all weird. Our third story here. On September 27th, 1989, Lieutenant Sergei Matviev of the Voronezh District Police Station, which Voronezh is a pretty decent sized city, about 325 miles south of Moscow. Sergei watched a banana-shaped object float down from the sky without making a single sound. Initially, he thought he was just tired and hallucinating, but after aggressively rubbing his eyes and trying to shake himself awake, you know how you see in cartoons, the object still remained in the sky, slowly floating down. Despite how strange this was, Sergei thought that it was probably just an experimental military aircraft and just kind of kept going about his job. Meanwhile, in a nearby park, 3 children watched a dark red orb, at least 30 feet wide, slowly descend down toward them. By the time it had reached the ground, hovering just a few feet above them, several more people in the area had gathered around, and then suddenly a hatch opened at the bottom of the craft. A 3-eyed humanoid creature, roughly 9 feet tall, allegedly emerged from this hatch and started, kind of looking around, seeing what's going on, seeing how sad everything is in Russia. And this creature was dressed in silver overalls with bronze boots and had a disc attached to its chest, kind of like, I guess, Iron Man. After a brief survey of the area, the creature then jumped back into the craft, landed it, on the ground, because again, this craft is still hovering, landed it, and then emerged with another 3-eyed alien and its robot companion. So it's got, it's got a little C-3PO or whatever going on there. The aliens kind of talked back and forth to each other for a moment in front of this stunned crowd before they just kind of magically produced this shiny triangle. And then they touched their little R2-D2 or whatever it was, which then turned it on and then sent it moving around the area where these people were standing and watching. At that point, a young boy in the crowd just completely lost his mind and started screaming in terror. One of the aliens stared at him, and its eyes began shining very brightly as he was staring at this kid. And in a couple of seconds, this boy just started to illuminate and shine. And then in a couple of seconds, he was completely paralyzed. And so with that, So this is so weird. It's such a random story. After that, the aliens and the little R2D2 return to the craft for a moment before emerging once again and, staring back out at this crowd. This time, however, one of the aliens had what looked like a gun with a 2-foot long barrel in its arms. The alien then pointed it at a 16-year-old boy and pulled the trigger, and immediately this kid disappeared. Like, I don't know if he was vaporized or like somehow got telekinetically transported to somewhere else, but they shot this kid, and then the aliens just boarded the ship back up. Oh wait, here's what happened. I should have just kept reading the story. When the aliens reboarded the ship, the boy just reappeared where he originally stood, which is insane. What's the point of that? He had no idea what had just happened. Like, he has no way of explaining where he went or what he felt. He just gets shot by this gun, disappears, and then when the aliens go back in the ship, he just immediately reemerges and what's the word? I don't know, like reconstitutes himself or whatever. Russian authorities, because like obviously there's this huge crowd that sees this, Russian authorities quickly launched an investigation since it would really be preposterous that a group of roughly 50 people, including a police officer, would corroborate such an insane story. Within days, several more reports of similar looking craft had been spotted that week, both before and after the event that launched the entire investigation. So basically, word of this encounter gets out, and now so many people are coming forward with their own sightings. Like, some people say it had happened before this encounter. Some saying it had continued happening. So many things. Even more, when the head of the Voronezh Geophysical Laboratory separately asked every single child that was there to draw what they had seen, every child produced a similar drawing of a banana-shaped craft that left an X-shaped mark in the sky as it departed. And allegedly, none of these kids were like kind of corroborating on it together. Like, they were all isolated. They all were told to draw the same thing. Investigators who visited the site found holes in the ground that looked like an elephant's footprint. And cesium, a radioactive isotope, was found in above average levels at the site, though researchers from the University of Voronezh said that it wasn't significant enough to cause any harm. Media outlets from around the world picked up the story, and they couldn't believe it. And they repeatedly asked if the story was fake. And Russia, who honestly would have no reason to lie about anything to the outside capitalist world in 1989, insisted that this story was totally real and definitely happened. And that's it. Like, after that, no one has any other detail about it. So, I don't know. Our final story here happened on January 20th, 1996, when sisters Liliane and Valkyria Fatima Silva were walking with their friend Katia Xavier near the town of Varginha, Brazil. I want to just say it's Varginha, but I know that's wrong. It's Varginha. Varginha. Anyway, Brazil. These three girls came across a strange looking creature. Like, they were just walking around the outskirts of town. They come across this strange creature. It was about 5 feet tall with a large head and a very thin body. It had V-shaped feet, large red eyes, and brown skin. This creature appeared really disoriented and woozy, and the girls thought that it might be injured. However, they were also super grossed out and scared, so they ran back home to Silva's mother, the sister's mother, and told him that they had just seen the devil, which, how else are you going to describe that? The mother didn't believe them, but accompanied them back out to the spot where they had seen it. But by then the creature had obviously disappeared, but the area smelled very strongly of ammonia. The only thing left was a stray dog sniffing a pair of footprints. But at that point, the mother kind of believed that the girls were telling the truth. So news of this encounter spread quickly throughout the city, eventually culminating into a story that some alien had landed and had been captured by the Brazilian government. And then 2 days after that encounter, someone else spotted a similar looking creature beside the road. where 3 military trucks allegedly appeared a couple of minutes later and picked it up. A janitor at the local zoo reported seeing a strange creature and noted 3 animals that later died under mysterious circumstances inside the zoo. Even more, Oralina and Eurico de Freitas reported seeing a UFO flying over their cattle for 40 minutes. And at that point, local and international television stations started reporting on this series of events. Dr. Roger Layer, a podiatrist from California, decided he was going to figure this out because foot doctors know all about aliens. He visited the city a few days after the reports came out and conducted interviews with several witnesses. And he concluded that there had been at least 2 different creatures that had been seen, one of which was injured. These creatures were then picked up and taken to a local medical clinic for help, where nurses recounted various paranormal occurrences, the details of which apparently do not exist. Cannot find them anywhere. The Brazilian government on multiple occasions denied any possession of extraterrestrial beings, but many people obviously believe this was a cover-up. So obvious, bro. So obvious. In 2010, Brazilian military authorities concluded that the Silva sisters had not come across an alien at all, but rather just a homeless, mentally disabled man named Madinho, who was literally just covered in mud. So, like, apparently in this city, there's just this homeless guy who's just always covered in mud, and they just nicknamed him Madinho. Oh, God, that's funny. In turn, reports of an alien couple at the medical clinic was actually just a dwarf couple expecting a baby. Oh, God, that's so mean. Who knew Brazilians could be so dumb but mean at the same time? It's just like imagine you're walking into a medical clinic and you just see like a dwarf couple and you've never seen that in your life and you just immediately think that they're aliens. Like, that's so mean. But that is the end of today's stories. All right, the 4th edition of some stories about some aliens, and specifically some alien encounters in the books. Here's the thing. Not going to do a what did we learn today, specifically recapping today's episode, but I am going to learn you something.
What did we learn?
So for a lot of these like supposed alien encounters, there's one thing that's really lacking in these stories, and that is the historical context around them, right? So we had an episode a while back with like Kenneth Arnold, and he's seeing all of these, crazy looking aircraft flying around. Obviously you have the Roswell incident, which is like the most famous alien, quote unquote encounter, right? Like a alien craft crashed. There were bodies. They didn't really look human because they had giant heads or whatever. And there was like silver, whatever. And it just kind of grew from there. But here's the thing. And if you are like, yeah, of course it's what the government wants you to think. Like, no, like this is legitimately what happened. Like you can do a simple search for this. It's just frustrating that like the narrative has just been left to the general public to kind of put this together for themselves. Like the government really just never came out and explained this very well. But during, kind of the period between World War I and World War II, but especially in World War II, the Germans were experimenting with various types of aircraft, different shapes, right? And one of the things that they came up with was this kind of concept of the flying wing. And if you look up pictures of flying wings, you get these very shiny, very like semicircle shaped aircraft. It's very similar to the stealth bomber that we have today, that black triangular shaped airplane that we have. It's a flying wing. But here's the thing. A lot of this was done in secret under the time of war. No one had ever seen something like this before. It's the first use of like jet engines. and, obviously the fires that coming out of it. Well, at the conclusion of World War II, the United States, in conjunction with the British, were going in and confiscating a lot of this German technology. At the same time, John Northrop of Northrop Grumman, which is this giant aerospace engineering firm, here they're also doing experiments and trying to come up with their own flying wing design. And at this time, they're doing a lot of tests out in the desert. The actual operation was Operation Lusty, which is short for Luftwaffe Secret Technology. It's a bit of a stretch, but okay. And they're going back and forth between Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, which is a famous Air Force Base with a lot of alien lore around it. And they're also back and forth at the White Sands Missile Testing Ground in New Mexico. North of White Sands is a massive airstrip. It was a secret airstrip. The government didn't want anybody knowing about it. 6 miles long. That's where they were doing a lot of this testing. And because these planes were hundreds of miles an hour faster than the jets that the United States had at that time, and because they could fly at a much higher altitude than than the existing US technology could do at that time, pilots were wearing these basically crude forms of spacesuits. They had these giant helmets. They were silver. They were trying to figure out how to keep pilots safe at those altitudes because they just didn't know. And one of these flying wing prototypes was launched off of this airstrip out in New Mexico, and directly, I think it was either directly east or directly north of the two giant airstrips out there is where the Roswell incident happened. And so you've got these experimental planes, flying, taking off. One crashes. There's bodies, but they're in these weird suits. They're giant heads. People don't have the conceptual framework to be able to accurately describe what's going on, And so it's just all of this crazy imagery. And because these are top secret government projects, the government's not going to come in and explain everything that's going on. But you can literally look up Operation Lusty now and see everything that was going on. It was also a part of Operation Paperclip, which is a bigger operation around this time as well. But it also explains the aircraft that Kenneth Arnold saw flying over Mount Rainier later in 1947, because Northrop Grumman, this is a private company. They're running their own experiments. They're testing their own designs. They're under no obligation to tell anyone any of this. And so you start putting some of these stories together. They start sounding very familiar. And as much as people would love for it to sound like aliens visited the Earth, and especially because we have some of these stories where they're warning people, well, don't use nuclear power. You can see how these stories progressed and almost became folklore and part of the mythos of American history, when in reality, there were never any aliens. It was these experimental private corporation aircraft. It would be like if Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos were secretly testing their own space, their own space flight vehicles, right? But they've been pretty public about it. So it's not that, but the SpaceX stuff and the Starlink stuff, that blows people's minds when it launches. And some people who aren't aware think something crazy is going on, but Musk is very public about it. And so again, it's fun to think about, sure. But the reality is that a lot of these alien encounters, I hate to be a Debbie Downer here, it's experimental aircraft, whether it's from a private company or it's a secret government project, it is what it is. But that doesn't stop other people from believing that there are aliens out there. And we will come back to some alien sightings later on with some people who claim to have been contacted by aliens later this month. Next week on Our Weird World, we're going to talk about something that's totally real, you guys. Ghosts! Our second series on some ghost stories, 3 stories. We're looking at the tales of Bill Skeeto, Alexander Campbell, and Desmond Arthur. And some of these stories actually do have like evidence of like some weird paranormal things going on. So like I'm being facetious, but it's probably like, here's the thing. If we're going to put a scale on like realness and authenticity of these stories, next week's stories probably more real than this week's stories. So I guess that's some kind of consolation, right? I guess, but that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird. When the winter's here, yeah, it's party time. Bring your bottle, wear your bright clothes. It'll soon be summertime, and we'll sing again, we'll go driving, or maybe we'll settle down. If she's rich, if she's nice, bring your friends, and we'll all go into town. In the summertime, when the weather is high, you can stretch right up and touch the sky. When the weather's fine, you got women on your mind. Have a drink, have a drive, go out and see what you can find. If her daddy's rich, take her out for a meal. If her daddy's poor, just do what you feel. Speed along the lane, do a ton or a ton and 25. When the sun goes down, you can make it good in a lay-by. Okay. We're not gray people. We're not dirty. We're not mean. We love everybody, but we do as we please. When the weather's fine, we go fishing or go swimming in the sea. We're always happy. Life's for living. Yeah, that's our philosophy.